Sorry, I didn't see you come in. If you just heard the opening sequence to 1968's Rosemary's Baby, I just watched this movie for the first time yesterday. This is Roman Polanski's first film in the United States that he directed, and Jesus Christ was I terrified just of the implications of this film. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the plot. I'm not going to go too into depth with it. I'm going to give you the setup, the initial setup of what this movie looks like, and then also I'm going to give you some of my pros and some of my cons of this film. And then I'll tell you whether or not you should go check this film out. So, like I said, the title of the sequence is a very creepy, kind of strange, kind of eerie kind of opening that I think is really cautionary to this tale that's about to unfold, which I think is really cool because in the late 60s, I feel like there was a shift in cinema from the early 60s to the late. So, for instance, you could talk about Stanley Kubrick when he had Spartacus in 1960, around that time, and then you go all the way to the end of the decade when he had 2001: A Space Odyssey. The shift in the tonal feel of most movies had like kind of shifted. So a lot of these movies in the late 60s were kind of the first of its time. So, for instance, Rosemary's Baby kind of influenced The Exorcist and things to come after that. And The Exorcist came out in 1973. This movie terrified people as well, but this movie also dealt with a very similar premise of the devil being within a certain situation around us. And I think that's really, really cool about this film. I read up a little bit about this, and I've found out that the LaVeyan Satanists actually have helped Roman Polanski do a little of this. And if you don't know what LaVeyan Satanists are, I would definitely recommend looking into that because that's really interesting history connected to this film. Let me just talk about what's the setup. So you have Rosemary and Guy. There's this young couple, and they're moving into New York to this apartment flat, and pretty much they're just checking it out at first, and they're like, wow, this is really, really cool. I like this apartment. And like it's huge, it's got cool things. They just got re-renovated. The person before had died, and so it was an elderly woman. They're like, yeah, let's get this house. And they're like, yeah, and then but Guy and Rosemary at the same time, they're just trying to settle down. Rosemary wants to have a baby, and Guy also wants to have a baby, so they're trying to figure out that whole situation. But they also meet these two people who are next door, who are an elderly couple who have been living there for quite some time, and you start noticing some strange things about this couple and also some of the other people in this movie. These people somehow are scaring Rosemary in some kind of capacity. Initially, they're annoying her with constantly getting into her everyday situation. The woman, in particular, of the elderly couple, keeps coming over and just like, oh yeah, we can do some stuff. We can talk about things. We can knit, do all this kind of stuff. And so it's definitely kind of an overbearing neighbor, and she just kind of wants to get left alone. But at the same time, she's kind of sweet. And so Rosemary's like, yeah, it's okay, I guess. And then the other guy, the husband, who is very interesting, keeps talking about how his travels, he's constantly been everywhere. He knows a lot of things, and he's been around. So he's kind of, initially when I watched this, he kind of reminded me of a suspicious kind of person. I was like, oh, you've been everywhere. This guy might be, because I already knew the pretenses of this movie, maybe being a little satanic, and so I was thinking, oh, okay, well, he might be connected somehow to something. And so the story unfolds from there, where things aren't seeming what they seem to be. And one particular night, by the way, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm getting slightly into spoiler territory. I'm going to get to this setup right here, to this crucial event that happens in the film about 50 minutes in that you don't want to hear if you've never seen this movie. But so we get to the point where they're in the apartment flat. Guy and Rosemary are just having a romantic night, and they're trying to set up, like, yeah, let's have a baby, yeah, let's do that. And so they get interrupted by the woman again, but she's at the door, and then Rosemary's just like, please don't come in, like it's annoying me that she's constantly here. And then Guy comes back with two chocolate confessions, a dessert, looks like a pudding or a mousse of some sort. And she's like, oh, okay. And then Guy's like, oh, it's fine. She's not coming. She just wanted to give us dessert. It's perfectly fine. She's like, oh, yeah, we can do that. And so from there, they eat their dessert, but Rosemary already can tell something's wrong with this dessert somehow. Like after her second bite, she's like, "This is really chalky. I don't really like this that much." She's like, and then guys like insisted. It's like, "Oh, come on, it's dessert, and they made it for us." And she kind of ate it sarcastically, but she ate it, and the guy ate his as well. Later, in that same time sequence, she started feeling a little woozy as Guy was watching television, and she started falling down. She's like, "Whoa, what's going on?" You can tell something happened to her. She was drugged in some capacity, and she got put on the bed with guys like, "Oh, it's fine." I'm like, "Yeah, just take a rest and stuff." And she starts hallucinating. And by the way, I didn't mention that she's been hallucinating a little bit here and there with some of her dreams of some satanic issues and some things that have been going on. Pretty much what happens is followers, and they're all naked, and they're all chanting Latin at her, but she's like just drifting in and out of it. And what happens is Guy is there as well. She's like, "Do you think she's awake?" I'm like, "I swear she's knocked out," or something like that. And he's naked too with these followers. And what happens is, initially, Guy comes up and tries to perform sex, except it's not Guy that she sees. It's actually the devil, and you can see the satanic imagery in this scene, but also at the same time you can just feel with the way the mood is set up, the lighting in this film, the way it's shot, and also just like the sound effects and also the soundtrack really kick in there. So that's where the devil has sex with Rosemary and pretty much implants her with a baby in some capacity. And so she doesn't know this. She thinks it's kind of a dream. She may have seen it happen. She wakes up a little bit later and she's got a scratch on her ribs, and she's like, "Well, okay, I think that something weird happened last night, and why am I naked and all these things." And the guy's like, "Oh, I just had a rough night. You got out fast. We were both drunk and we had sex." So I'm going to talk less about the plot now. So that's where the story unfolds and things delve deeper and deeper into madness and also just paranoia. And I think that's really cool about this movie. Alright, so let me talk about some of the pros. So this movie is way ahead of its time. Like I was saying a little earlier, this movie is just, to me, it's astounding. This movie came out in 1968 because at the height of the civil rights era, this is the very end. This is right before, I think, Robert Kennedy was shot. A lot of this was sexual promiscuity, and there's just a lot of no, you don't do that in movies. And I think Roman Polanski nailed this one on the head, and just kind of opened the door for a lot of things to be acceptable in film. And I think that's really interesting. And also, if you look back at the history of type of horror movies, this is almost Hitchcockian as well in some capacities. And if you keep going back, a lot of these things, build onto each other, and I think that's really interesting. And Rosemary's Baby is a perfect example of that. Another pro is the soundtrack was actually very interesting. I've never heard a soundtrack like this because a lot of it incorporated jazz. And I thought that was really interesting because of the time period, of course, in the 60s. This jazz highlighted a lot of the anxiety in this film, and also just a lot of the anxious moments that were just kept happening. And also this film, obviously the opening and the ending have the same kind of sequence that I played a little earlier, and it's kind of terrifying. It's kind of subtle, but also at the same time like, what's going on? Something's about to happen, and so that's something that I think the sound of the editing here were just fantastic at. And then finally, the lighting and also just the dream sequences I thought were brilliant additions to add to the suspense, because it's a very dialogue-driven movie, and I think Roman Polanski is actually very well known for dialogue. And I've yet to see Chinatown. I know, don't hurt me, but I've seen several of his movies, from Pianist to Carnage, which Carnage is just straight-up dialogue. And so these films, I can tell early on that Roman Polanski really cares about dialogue and really getting to know the characters involved in these films, and I think that's really brilliant. And so I thought that was really well done, that balance of dialogue combined with a lot of the sequences, the dream sequences, the satanic sequence, and other sequences that just kind of freak somebody out. So what does this leave? There's some other cons as well. This movie is paced fairly well. However, there's some parts in it that are a little slow, and I would say if you're not used to it, it could potentially hinder this movie. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of dialogue in this film, and it's really good. Also, it's a little outdated on some of the scares, obviously, and some of the dialogue near the end of the film. I can particularly think of some examples that kind of took me out. I'm like, okay, that's silly. But also at the same time, you have to remember when this came out. So with all that being said, I give this movie a 5 out of 5. I think this is a classic film, and I think just because I've seen it last night doesn't hinder what I'm going to give this movie. So I think this is a very great film, and I'm glad that I actually was able to watch it, especially during October for this October series. So let me know your thoughts on Rosemary's Baby, and don't forget to like, comment, share, and also subscribe, and I will see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.